I've been asked today, largely because of the nature of my hosts, to spend time talking about vibrant waterfronts as a critical component of livable cities. And I'm glad to see that Auckland seems to recognize how important it is to take advantage, to seize the opportunity that this incredible waterfront actually is to your city. And I know that it always probably hasn't been perceived as an advantage. For many cities, including Auckland, the waterfront was seen as a negative for so long. But now smart cities are re-embracing, spending a lot of energy to re-embrace the waterfront, to connect the city to the waterfront, because it's probably your greatest natural asset and something not to be squandered. And I'm going to try to tell you the story of certainly how Vancouver's been reconnecting to its waterfront over many decades. This has been a four-decade-long challenge for Vancouver, but I'm also going to show you examples and ideas and successes and maybe some failures from other cities as well. We're going to give you a bit of a tour of waterfront cities and talk about some of the things that we can all learn in terms of better waterfront making. And I start off with a little bit of context. Both Canada and Australia, and unfortunately they didn't put it in the headline, but of course Auckland is in there, in the top 10 most livable cities in the world. 7 out of 10 are Australian or Canadian, and when you add Auckland as an Australasian city, 8 out of 10 of the most livable cities in the world, if you agree with the Economist's methodology, are in Canada and Australasia, which is pretty impressive as a starting point. But that doesn't mean that we can all afford to rest on our laurels. Now, if I'm asking my tech guys, I don't need to stand there, do I? Because I'm mic'd. Great. But having said that, it doesn't mean you still don't have work to do in changing your mindset and your culture towards smarter, better, innovative risk-taking and city-making. And so I like to start off with this point that I'm sure at some point in this talk, most of you will be thinking the 8 most unhelpful words in the English language, as I call it, which is, we could never do that in our city. It's amazing to me how much energy often goes into convincing me as a visitor when I come to a city how what I'm suggesting or encouraging you to do is in some way impossible here. Don't I understand, Brent, that we are flat or hilly or rainy or cold or sunny? Fill in the blank. There's always lots of reasons why the things that I'm going to talk about are not possible. But my message to you is that it's not about the barriers and constraints. It's about the will and skill to move forward and find a way to succeed, notwithstanding some of these initial barriers and constraints, which aren't the barriers and constraints that you probably really think they are. The consequences of doing our city making better has never been more clear. Whether you're motivated by the implications of climate change and the very direct connection between how we build cities and communities and our carbon footprint and our contribution to climate change is probably the most significant threat to our future that there is out there. Or if you're motivated by the increasing data and evidence that the way we design our communities and cities dramatically affects our public health and contributes to issues of diabetes and heart disease and obesity levels, both amongst adults and children. We're starting to see these kinds of headlines. Do these suburbs make me look fat? Because we're connecting the dots, and our healthcare professionals are becoming the most powerful advocate and ally for a different, better way of building and designing our cities, because we seem to be trained to listen to our doctors when they tell us that we're doing something wrong, maybe more than we're trained to listen to our city planners when they tell us that we're doing something wrong. As an example of that, this was a press conference held by the top 4 public health officials in counties across the Greater Toronto area. And they called a press conference to talk about transit and cycling infrastructure and walkable communities, because they said this was the most powerful way that governments could influence public health. And boy, did it ever get a lot of attention. It got a lot more media attention than if the 4 chief planners of those regions had called a press conference, I can tell you. Because again, public health is a way for the media to get engaged into the discussion about city making. Similarly, cities in Canada, and hopefully I'm encouraging cities across New Zealand to start to do the math about the consequences, the cost consequences, the financial consequences of growing this way or that way or up or out. Because what Canadian cities are finding when they're starting to do the complete, full cost accounting math, that the costs of growth in different directions, up versus out, this direction versus that direction if there's a slope, can be billions of dollars of difference. There's math being done where literally on the front pages of the paper it's saying that the difference might be $2 billion, $3 billion, $5 billion, $10 billion within the context of a life of a plan, whether you grow smartly through infill and strategic densification versus continued greenfield sprawl and such. So I'll tell you, this kind of conversation is changing the political discourse and the community discourse about growth, because whether you're a so-called right-wing politician or a so-called left-wing politician, billions of dollars are a lot of money. And it's a very pragmatic reason to have a different conversation about growth. So all sorts of different, all sorts of different issues converging with better city making as the convenient part of the answer about whether your challenges are housing affordability, rising costs of energy, climate change, aging population, public health, etc. The good news is that the way we build and design our cities is fundamentally connected to success in all of these ways, so incredibly powerful. So that means for the planners and the politicians and the other city makers in this room, a lot of these things are in our bailiwick. They're our responsibility, and they connect to how we're choosing to build cities. And just because I've had a couple of mayors in New Zealand in the last while say to me, well, Brent, won't the automated cars solve the problem for us? And the bad news is they won't. No technological solution will solve the problem for us. There is no technological green fix. And when I talk to technology audiences and such, I often show this kind of image. What direction do I have to point this to? There we go. I think I have to point it to the podium. I often show this image because it's the low-tech solutions like wheeled luggage and grocery trolleys, that is the tech, if you will, that will actually help contribute to our cities making better. It isn't automated cars, it's wheeled luggage that actually might have a greater transformative effect on the way we conceive and think about how we interact with our city. So I'm not a Luddite, and I like technology in terms of improving things, but it's these low-tech solutions that are key. The good news is if that tech won't save us, demographics may go a long way, because the second largest cohort in human history, the millennials, the 18 to 35-year-olds, are predisposed towards urban living, urban and transit-oriented, walkable, cyclable living. And it's a foundational change. It's not just because they're young and they're going to grow out of it. They interact with technology like smartphones in the way that previous generations interacted with the car in terms of providing freedom. So this is foundational, and it will continue to change. And this is an incredible thing to build on if you're building urban settings like Wynyard Quarter. But similarly, the parents of the millennials, the boomers, the so-called, and forgive me, I don't quote this to be insulting. A few people have told me they're a bit insulted by the term. But this term broken hipsters is an interesting piece of language for me, because the suggestion is it's the older baby boomers that are acting like the young hipsters, because they're choosing urban settings, they're interested in mobility freedom, they don't want to be dependent on the car, they want to be closer to their kids and grandkids, they're choosing the same kind of urban settings for different reasons maybe, but they're coming to the same conclusion. And this is the largest cohort demographic group in human history. So the two largest, the millennials and the baby boomers, are both predisposed towards urban choices. And so what's our excuse? We just have to provide them with that choice in a form that they can afford, and part of that is by providing supply. And the demographic group in the middle, the families, what we've shown in Vancouver is that families will go into urban settings if you design for kids. And I do a whole talk just on that. But I invite you to take a look at some of the writing I've done in that context, because the point is that families will choose downtowns and urban settings if you don't design them in a way that literally repels children, which is how we've been designing our urban centers in the past. But Auckland is one of the leaders in this area. I was marveling yesterday when I was walking along the waterfront how many kids I saw, how many baby strollers I saw. And I say that kids are the indicator species of a great neighborhood or a great waterfront, because it shows that it's considered safe, it's considered interesting. If it's good for kids, it's good for everyone. So in Vancouver's context, we've got a lot of attention. We're routinely ranked as one of the most livable cities in the world. We were named by Time magazine as the healthiest city in the world. most reputable city in the world by a brand maker. Condé Nast named us the most visitable city in the world. Top green city, top innovative city, top walking city, top transit city, top biking city, top coffee city, top beach city, which is important for a waterfront discussion. The key is economically successful city, and I don't show this slide to brag. I show this slide because all the things I'm talking about are in the context of economic success. And many of your politicians, unfortunately, and sometimes the media, positions these false choices where you can either do smart city making or job creation and economic development, because planning and design stands in the way of job creation or economic development. That is a false choice. It is a false narrative. What smart cities understand is good planning and design is the bedrock and basis of success. Almost any way you can define success. And so we need to constantly call the people that are trying to set up these false choices, positioning planning and good design poorly. It's great, I think, that your mayor has set out the challenge of becoming the most livable city in the world. I notice there's no deadline for that, which leaves it pretty open-ended. Hopefully we'll all still be alive when you reach that goal. But I think it's powerful for cities to challenge each other and set a little bit of competition, a sense of competition and jealousy, strategic jealousy. I said to the mayor of Wellington, do you want Auckland to be the most livable city in even New Zealand? Or wouldn't you want to have that title? Because you want the different cities to be improving themselves. And if competition is the way to get you there, then great. For us in Vancouver, the goal has been a complete downtown and waterfront, sustainable, resilient, livable, healthy, vibrant. The fact that it's multi-purpose, multimodal, it's a mature downtown and waterfront that can do more than one thing well. And I'm hearing the same kind of language working with the Waterfront gang, so I'm pleased about that. So in starting to zero in on the waterfront details, you can see we've got a lot of water. Our downtown peninsula is almost surrounded by water, and we've really had a series of experiments along our water edge over generations, about 40 years, that have constantly been teaching us about what works and doesn't work in the context of waterfront planning and design. The most important thing we did for our waterfront planning is to not build freeways on it. Kind of goes without saying, but unfortunately I have to say it still frequently with cities around the world, because this is where our freeways were planned to go before they were famously rejected in the late 1960s, early 1970s. It would have lobotomized our waterfront and our downtown in the same way that unfortunately freeways did with so many different cities. And luckily, our citizens rose up, and then our politicians replaced other politicians, and this idea was fundamentally rejected. We're the only city in North America that within our municipal boundaries there are no freeways. We have no motorways. Is that what you call them here, motorways? I'm not sure if this suggests a large aspect of freeways, so I'll use that if that's more appropriate. But I'm finding it fascinating that cities are getting a lot of attention these days by tearing out or burying their freeways, and Seoul, Korea is the poster child for this. Taking out a freeway and daylighting a river and creating this wonderful public space, which has been incredibly successful in Seoul. I often point out that Vancouver should get bonus points because we never built them in the first place. So we didn't have to have the incredibly tough conversation about whether it's worth money to tear them out, whether the city could function if we tore them out. What we've proved is that the city functions better without them. Because we never built them and it's actually supported our success, we've never had to have that debate. And it's ironic that the cities that built them are the ones that think they need them. It's the hardest conversation to convince a city that once they're built, they're not necessary anymore. When we never built them and we know we don't need them. When I tweeted something to that effect, a Twitter colleague tweeted this as Brisbane, Australia, and said, "Is this what you mean?" And yes, it's worse than I thought, actually. I'm going to Brisbane in a week and a half or so, and I'm going to use this picture. I might start my presentation with this picture and say, "Don't do this, thank you and good night." That might be the end of the conversation. But how do you have a conversation about waterfront when that's your waterfront?